Hey everyone, Mr. W here. Today's lesson is on dividing decimal numbers, and we're dividing with whole number divisors to tenths. Decimal numbers are numbers that have decimal points. For example, our dividend of 3 and 5/10 has a decimal point. Our whole number divisors means that we're dividing by numbers that do not have decimal points, they're whole numbers, and tenths is a reference to the place value that we're working to today. When you divide decimal numbers, the focus of this lesson, or our main ideas, is that you don't want to forget the decimal point. So for example, 3 and 5/10 divided by 5, you might think that it's 7. And if you do, you're really close. But the idea is that if you're dividing a number with a decimal point, your quotient, or in other words, your answer, must also have a decimal point. And if you get that, that's really the main idea today. So we would really say it's not 7, but it would be 7/10 and add our decimal point to that. The second main idea is just to make sure that you line up your decimal point correctly. Decimal points have a job of organizing your place value. Everything to the left side of the decimal point, in this case the 3, are whole numbers. Everything to the right side of the decimal point, in this case the 5, are decimal numbers. You don't want to confuse a decimal number like 3 and 5/10 with a whole number, 35. They are very different. They are not equal. 3 and 5/10, the 3 would represent 3 wholes. The 5 represents 5/10, the fraction 5/10. And the question is, well, the digits look kind of similar. How do you know which is a fraction and which is a whole number? That's the job of your decimal point. The decimal point separates your whole numbers on the left side, everything on the left, with your fractions on the right. But remember, your fractions are written in decimal form when you're dealing with decimal points. Our 3 for this problem is in the ones place value. The 5 is in the tenths, and don't forget your decimal points. We'll just put that up at the top as a reminder to make sure that you keep your place value and your decimal points organized properly. We'll put the 5 steps in the bottom corner, but that's not really our focus today, but we'll just put that there to help out. Okay, our first step is to put your decimal point up at the top. Again, notice that we put it between the ones and the tenths. That's not a rule, but it's a good idea to start with so that you don't forget your decimal point, okay? Okay, so our first step is how many times can 5 go into 3 without going over? Well, if we look at 5 times 1, already that's too much. So we're going to go back to 0. In other words, the answer is 0. 5 does not go into 3 at all. Next, we go to the tenths place value and ask yourself, how many times can 5 go into 3 and 5/10 without going over? We'll look at our multiplication facts, and we see that 5 times 7 equals 35. Now, don't let the 35 confuse you, because earlier I said that's different from 3 and 5/10. You could think of that in terms of 35/10, okay? And that's another lesson, but for now, we're going to use the 35, okay? So 5 times 7 equals 35. We're going to use the 7, and we're going to use the 35. The 7 goes on top in the tenths place value. The 35 we're going to put below, but let's change that, which right now I would call that 35/10. Let's turn that into 3 and 5/10 by adding our decimal point. And when you subtract, we have no remainder. So our answer is 7/10. We can show that with models. 3 and 5/10 is modeled there with your 3 wholes and your 5/10. If we wanted 5 groups, each would show 7/10. So there are 7/10 in pink, a second group in like a white color there, a third group that overlaps, but if you count those blues, that is also 7/10. The yellow, it's kind of awkward, and then finally our orange. But that's kind of what we're doing today when you're dividing a decimal number, and in this case we have 7/10 for our answer. Okay, let's try another one. 7 and 2/10 divided by 2. Put your decimal point in between the ones and the tenths up top and ask yourself, how many times can 2 go into 7 without going over? Well, with our multiplication facts on the right side, we can see that the best answer would be 2 times 3 equals 6, and that's without going over the 7. We're going to use the 3 and the 6. The 3 goes on top and the 6 on the bottom. Then we would subtract. 7 take away 6 is 1. Next, we're going to have to bring down that 2. All right, and that'll give us 12. We'll pop that decimal point in the top back there again. And now we are done with that part. We'll put an X over that. And now ask yourself, how many times can 2 go into 1 and 2/10 without going over? This is where you need your multiplication facts. And we can see at the bottom on the right there that 2 times 6 equals 12. In this case, 12/10, right? And we're going to use the 6 and the 12. The 6 goes in the tenths place value at the top. The 12 goes on the bottom, but remember that's 12/10, and we're going to convert that into 1 and 2/10. And when you subtract, we get a final answer of 3 and 6/10. All right, let's try one more. 8 and 4/10 divided by 6. And pause it for a moment if you like, and we'll solve. Okay, first step is to place your decimal point at the top. We don't want to forget that. Okay, we're going to put that in between our ones and tenths place value. We'll start with the 8 and ask yourself, how many times can 6 go into 8 without going over? On the right, we'll put up some multiplication facts, and we can see that 6 times 1 equals 6 is the best we can do without going over. We'll use the 1 and the 6. The 1 goes on the top in the ones place value, and the 6 goes underneath the 8. Let's subtract. 8 minus 6 is 2. And then we're going to bring down that 4. Okay, kind of change that a little bit. We added our decimal point in there. And now we're done with the part that has the X on it, but let's focus on the 6 and the 2 and 4/10. Ask yourself, how many times can 6 go into 2 and 4/10 without going over? We'll put our 6 facts up to the right side, and we can see that 6 times 4 is an exact fit. 6 times 4 equals 24, so we're going to use the 4 and the 24. The 4 goes into the tenths position at the top. The 24/10, let's turn that into 2 and 4/10, and when you subtract, that is 0. And our final answer is 3 and 4/10. Well, thank you if you've made it this far. Keep practicing, and we hope to see you on the next one.